There is one awkward detail in the biography of Peter the Great. It concerns the identity of his biological father. Those named as possible fathers include Tsar Alexei Romanov himself, the Georgian prince Erekle Bagrationi, one of the boyars, and Franz Lefort, a Swiss diplomat of German origin.
What is this? Historical blackmail or a simple algorithm? Why is Alexei Romanov's paternity called into question?
Russia's first and most famous emperor, Peter the Great, was born into the family of the Russian Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich Romanov as a result of the Tsar's second marriage. Alexei had 13 children from his first marriage. 5 of them were boys, and all 5 had serious health problems.
Alexei Romanov's second marriage, to Peter's mother Natalia Naryshkina, took place in 1671 at the Dormition Cathedral in Moscow.
It is precisely during this period that our central figure, Erekle, appears. The man who, so to speak, is credited with being Peter's father.
Over time, for various objective reasons, the other candidates for the emperor's paternity lost credibility. To this day, the most convincing version remains the one involving the Georgian Erekle Bagrationi. He was also known as Nazar Ali Khan and was called Nikolai Davidovich at the Russian royal court.
Historian Nana Gegelashvili is well acquainted with the documents preserved in Russian sources concerning the first Georgian Bagrationists to settle at the Russian royal court, Erekle II and Erekle Nazar Ali Khan. The 17th century Russian Tsardom was a rather dangerous country for foreigners when Georgian princes began arriving there. Travelers and diplomats generally avoided entering the country.
You had to be a great adventurer and utterly fearless to go there. Our Bagrationists were probably just as fearless and adventurous when they traveled to Russia.
What did the Georgian Bagrationists want in a country that was expanding into Siberia and the Urals on one front while fighting Sweden and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth on another? What were the Georgians looking for in Moscow? Russian support against an aggressive Iran, or the prospect of personally taking the throne in the Georgian kingdoms?
I wonder why the Bagrationists believed they could interest Russia in Eastern affairs this way. Russia was busy expanding into Siberia and the Urals, and had already reached the Pacific Ocean. The Kakhetian Bagrationists' hope that Russia would help them in any way was doomed from the outset.
However, there was a reason Erekle, the grandson of Teimuraz I, was sent to Moscow. Most likely, the aim was to ensure the physical survival of the heir to the throne.
Teimuraz I devoted much of his life and sacrificed many members of his family to the struggle against Iran. He sent Erekle, the eldest son of the deceased heir to the throne, David, to Russia while the boy was still very young. Erekle first ruled in Kakheti. He then became king of Emeriti twice, each time briefly, but he could not establish himself there. That is why he ultimately ended up in Russia at the Tsar's court.
The Bagrationists became actively involved in life in Moscow. Evidence of this can be found in a book by Nikolai Zwitsyn, the 18th century burgomaster of Amsterdam, which included portraits of Erekle II and Erekle I. One way or another, the Bagrationists became acquainted with Russia and Moscow while also introducing themselves to local society. For years, they lived in royal palaces and residences. While in Moscow, they witnessed the death of Alexei Romanov's first wife, Maria Miloslavskaya, and attended her funeral.
2 years after his wife's death, it was decided that the widowed Russian Tsar, Alexei Romanov, would marry again. A small circle of boyars who supported strengthening the Romanov dynasty on the Russian throne was in a great hurry for the Tsar to remarry.
The Tsar had been battling a serious illness for a long time. He was gaining weight at a catastrophic rate and suffered from shortness of breath and a lack of energy. The Romanov supporters understood that the Tsar did not have long to live, so they had to secure a healthy heir to the throne. At the home of the influential boyar Artemon Matveyev, it was decided that the widowed Tsar would marry Naryshkina, a descendant of the Crimean Tatars.
Natalia Naryshkina was raised in the household of the head of the Foreign Affairs Office. Matveyev's wife was a Scottish woman named Hamilton. Ambassadors from various countries gathered in their home, modern European music was played, an orchestra performed, and plays were staged.
The 42-year-old Tsar Alexei was captivated by 19-year-old Natalia, but he did not want to break with tradition. He repeated a ritual that was extremely popular in Russian life at the time. 70 young unmarried women were gathered from across the country and entered into a marathon competition for the status of Tsarina.
The rules of the competition were as follows. The women had to know proper table manners, eat properly, and maintain personal hygiene. Great wealth or literacy was not required. They were not supposed to snore in their sleep or have any other bad habits. The most important and unconditional requirement of the competition was that every woman had to have dark eyes.
The Tsar was taken through the rooms where the contestants were sleeping. Even the amount of waste in their chamber pots was inspected. 19-year-old Natalia slept peacefully, did not snore, and had an empty chamber pot. The young and healthy Natalia Naryshkina was certainly a desirable candidate, but given Alexei Romanov's condition, how could anyone guarantee the birth of a healthy heir?
The wedding took place. Prince Erekle proved to be the central figure at the wedding. He was responsible for receiving and welcoming the guests. He was also the chief cupbearer and the newlyweds' best man.
The Tsar was taken through the rooms where the contestants were sleeping. Even the amount of waste in their chamber pots was inspected. 19-year-old Natalia slept peacefully, did not snore, and had an empty chamber pot. The young and healthy Natalia Naryshkina was certainly a desirable candidate, but given Alexei Romanov's condition, how could anyone guarantee the birth of a healthy heir?
This was the protocol. A clerk sat outside Naryshkina's rooms and recorded everything, who entered and who left. The Russian State Archive of Ancient Acts, where the records compiled by these clerks are preserved, contains evidence that Erekle, or Nikolai Davidovich, as he was known in Russia, entered Naryshkina's chambers several times. He had the legal right to enter because, as they said, he was the best man.
The wedding took place. Prince Erekle proved to be the central figure at the wedding. He was responsible for receiving and welcoming the guests. He was also the chief cupbearer and the newlyweds' best man. Peter the Great's older sister Sophia supposedly knew, from the time Peter was still in the womb, that his father was the Georgian prince Erekle Bagrationi. She would be the first to say, "You cannot hand power to a Basman." Whom did Russians call Basmans, and what do historians say about the term?
In a broad sense, the word may have referred to all Asians living to Russia's south and southeast. Europeans, of course, were not included in this category. It is possible that Caucasians, including Georgians, were called Basmans in this sense, even though they shared the same Christian faith as the Russian population of that period.
Another fact appears in the historiography. When Peter the Great was conceived, Tsar Alexei Romanov was not in Moscow at all.
It turns out that at the time, the Russian Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich Romanov was far from Moscow, in the south, because Russia was engaged in a military confrontation with the Ottoman Empire. In principle, this circumstance rules out the possibility that Peter the Great was truly Alexei Mikhailovich's biological son.
A healthy heir on the royal throne would guarantee the survival of the Romanov dynasty. Everything had to be done to ensure that outcome. According to one version, as an added safeguard, several pregnant German women were selected in Moscow's so-called German quarter while Naryshkina was pregnant.
A small circle of boyars took special care of these women. Their families were placed under surveillance and were even granted pensions.
There was a reason for the boyars' decision. If the heir were born weak, the newborn would be replaced immediately. But there was a second reason too, wasn't there? Naryshkina might give birth to a healthy child, but the child could be a girl. In that case, the newborn would also be replaced.
This theory had supporters then and still has supporters today. That is why Peter the Great's possible German origins are also frequently discussed.
Soon after Peter's birth, Erekle Bagrationi left Russia and returned to Georgia. His departure from Russia took place under strange circumstances. The famous 300-dish banquet was not held in his honor, although such a feast was customary at the Russian royal court whenever a foreign king or diplomat was seen off. Soon after Peter's birth, Erekle Bagrationi left Russia and returned to Georgia. His departure from Russia took place under strange circumstances. The famous 300-dish banquet was not held in his honor, although such a feast was customary at the Russian royal court whenever a foreign king or diplomat was seen off. Soon after Peter's birth, Erekle Bagrationi left Russia and returned to Georgia. His departure from Russia took place under strange circumstances. The famous 300-dish banquet was not held in his honor, although such a feast was customary at the Russian royal court whenever a foreign king or diplomat was seen off.
After Alexei Romanov's death, his sickly son Fyodor, born of his first marriage, ascended the throne. He died soon afterward.
The question then arose, who should ascend the Russian throne? The first candidate could have been Ivan, the only surviving son from the first marriage. The second candidate was Peter, the son born of the Tsar's second marriage. Peter, of course, was still a minor at the time. Both candidates had supporters among the Russian aristocracy and the boyars. To resolve the issue and avoid an acute confrontation, it was decided to proclaim both of them Tsars. Ivan V and Peter I ascended the throne simultaneously, while Sophia was appointed their guardian, or regent.
Alexei Romanov's first wife, Maria Miloslavskaya, was the most prolific Tsarina in Russian history. She died while giving birth to her 13th child. Maria's rise as Tsarina strengthened the Miloslavsky clan. Alexei Romanov's second marriage to Naryshkina pushed the already powerful Miloslavsky faction into the background and brought the Naryshkins to prominence. The Miloslavskys, however, would not accept their loss of influence. They would fight Peter the Great's accession to the very end. They would even involve the state guard in this struggle.
Peter the Great's sister, Sophia Romanova, responded to his accession by instigating the so-called Streltsy conspiracy of 1698. Sophia was backed by her mother's relatives, the Miloslavskys. This was Sophia's last chance to defeat Peter once and for all. In a letter to the powerful boyar Vasily Golitsyn, Sophia formally declared that power must not be handed to a Basman.
Ivan V died in 1696, leaving Peter the Great as the sole Tsar. At that point, Sophia tried to remove him. She incited the Streltsy, the musketeers, to rebel. Sophia won them over by claiming that Peter the Great was not a representative of the Russian royal dynasty. This can also be understood literally. Peter was not Alexei Mikhailovich's son.
Peter the Great suppressed the uprising. He forced the defeated, half-mad Sophia to become a nun, along with his other sisters. The Miloslavsky clan was neutralized in its struggle against Peter.
Although Peter the Great's successful political career was built on his temperament and strong character, he carried throughout his life the burden of believing that he was not Alexei Romanov's son.
For example, the Tsar would grab a boyar by the beard and drag him. Being dragged by the beard was a grave insult. One chronicle preserves the following entry. Peter says to a boyar, "Say it, you dog. Are you my father?" The reply was, "We do not know, your majesty. There were many of us." Even such an inappropriate entry, so to speak, survives in the sources from that period.
The famous writer Alexei Tolstoy discovered details preserved in Russian chronicles about Peter the Great's Georgian origins while working on his biographical novel Peter I.
This was, as you know, the Stalin era, when the so-called leader of the peoples controlled every field, including literature. Tolstoy went to Stalin to seek approval on whether he should present this issue to the wider reading public, Stalin's suggestion, which already amounted to an order and which no one would have dared oppose, was that Peter the Great should be left to the Russians and that the story should not be publicized. Nevertheless, Alexei Tolstoy still managed to include certain hints in his famous novel. This was, as you know, the Stalin era, when the so-called leader of the peoples controlled every field, including literature. Tolstoy went to Stalin to seek approval on whether he should present this issue to the wider reading public, Stalin's suggestion, which already amounted to an order and which no one would have dared oppose, was that Peter the Great should be left to the Russians and that the story should not be publicized. Nevertheless, Alexei Tolstoy still managed to include certain hints in his famous novel.
On Stalin's recommendation, the most important documentation concerning the Georgian theory of Peter the Great's origins was soon destroyed.
Peter the Great certainly resembles Erekle Bagrationi in appearance, although his height must have come entirely from the Naryshkin family. Natalia Naryshkina, her father, and her brothers were all very tall. Although Peter was nearly 2 meters tall, by today's standards, he wore a European size 38 shoe. He was very thin and had a disproportionately small head.
To put an end to the rumors and other speculation and settle the question scientifically, DNA would have to be taken from Peter the Great's remains and compared with the DNA of earlier Romanovs, his presumed father, and the sons from his presumed father's first marriage. The result would tell us conclusively whether Peter was truly Alexei Mikhailovich's son.
This is Erekle I, Nazar Ali Khan, and these are his sons, Imam Kuli Khan, Mahmad Kuli Khan, and Teimuraz II. If we believe Alexei Tolstoy, they were Peter the Great's half-brothers.